Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
And I'm Kat.
And this is our News Digest unit for this issue of our magazine. And we're talking about mummies in today's lesson. But as the lesson is going to tell us, maybe that isn't the right word for what these things are or who they were. We're talking about mummified remains.
Right. So exactly, mummies, people often think of as being kind of these spooky, supernatural monsters that rise out of the sand and pursue you across the world, that sort of thing. But they actually all were real people, is the thing.
That is the thing, and let's not delay any further. Let's listen to the entire contents of our article now read from top to bottom. Some archaeologists claim that the manner in which mummies are depicted in popular culture as supernatural monsters undermines the humanity of what were once real living people. For this reason, many British museums have taken the initiative to move away from the term mummy. Instead, they are opting to use the term mummified person. The National Museum of Scotland has altered the labeling in its Ancient Egypt exhibition to reflect this. In cases where the person's name is known, the mummified remains of name is used. Otherwise, mummified person is used. This change arose from the concern that visitors are viewing the mummified remains as if they were merely objects. This concern was expressed by Adam Goldwater, manager of the Great North Museum, Hancock, in a statement where he discussed the remains of Irturu, a mummified woman whose remains reside in the museum. Goldwater stated that he wants visitors to acknowledge that she is not an object, but a real human who was once alive and had a very specific belief about how her body should be treated after death. However, some critics have claimed this move doesn't achieve anything substantial. They say the name change supposedly respects ancient Egyptian culture, but makes no actual effort to heal the wounds of colonialism. In recent years, many British museums have come under fire for how the artifacts within their collections were obtained. Many relics of ancient Egypt were looted by Europeans and have subsequently been permanently damaged. Critics believe that if British museums want to respect the mummified people, they should repatriate them rather than display them on British soil. This would make amends for their colonial actions. While this debate rages on, we can still appreciate how this new term helps maintain the dignity and humanity of ancient Egyptians. Okay, let's dive right in and talk about these British museums. Those, of course, are museums in the UK,
right.
And they're changing the name for mummified remains. We did touch on this a little bit at the beginning, but a mummy is a body that has been preserved, and it was dug up out of the ground.
Yeah. Or taken out of tombs or, taken out of caves, something like that. Basically, they've been found where they were preserved, and they are remains of actual people. So they are changing the name from mummies to mummified remains. And remains basically means that these are what is left of a person's body. That's what we call a person's body after they've already died.
Right, so let's dive into the first paragraph here. It says, some archaeologists claim that the manner in which mummies are depicted in popular culture as supernatural monsters undermines the humanity of what were once real living people. Now, first of all, an archaeologist is somebody who digs things out of the ground to learn about the past.
Right. They're people who study the what is left behind from ancient human cultures, or sometimes ancient animals, something like that. But they would be studying things like the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Incans, the ancient maybe North Americans. Basically, any cultures that are not around anymore, but we can still learn about through examining the things they left behind.
Right. That's different from anthropology, which is the study of human beings, but archaeology focuses on basically the things they left behind, as you said.
Yeah, so anthropologists study modern humans too. And one thing that archaeologists study is mummies. And as we already said, these are human remains that have been preserved, usually by taking out their organs and drying up the body somehow, usually wrapping it in some kind of cloth that's going to keep it safe from the elements like rain and air and bacteria, things like that.
And we should say that the word mummy does refer to that thing you just described, but it can also refer to your mother.
No, mummy!
If you're in Canada or the UK, they tend to say mum or a mummy, whereas in the US we say mom or mommy.
That's right.
But we're focusing specifically on these bodies that came out of the ground, and they've been preserved for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And yes, indeed, archaeologists say that, hey, they're depicted unfairly in popular culture. They're depicted or described as supernatural monsters, and that undermines the humanity of what they once were. In other words, we think of them more as monsters than as having been real people who lived many years ago.
Yeah, and the next sentence says, for this reason, many British museums have taken the initiative to move away from the term mummy. So we're not just talking about the British Museum, which is one of the museums in Britain, but we're talking about a number of them that have different mummified remains in their collections. They're taking initiative. To take initiative means to kind of start to do something without somebody asking you to. It's to decide like, hey, I think this is a good thing to do. Nobody asked me to do it yet, but it's my idea first and I'm going to start to do it. So to take initiative means to be a self-starter, essentially.
Yep, and this comes from the verb to initiate, which means to start something and you don't wait for somebody else to do it first. You take the initiative, and that's what British museums are doing. They're not waiting for someone to ask them to do this. They're going to do it themselves, and they want to stop using the word mummy. And instead, they're opting to use the term mummified person. So their mummy is actually being used as a verb in the form mummify, which means you basically prepare a body for burial so that it can be preserved for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. So the person has been mummified. They've been preserved in the way that we described earlier. And the National Museum of Scotland has altered the labeling in its Ancient Egypt exhibition to reflect this. So when they say they've altered the labeling, it means they've already changed their exhibition labels, like the signs on their artifacts, from mummy to mummified person. And so they have a big ancient Egypt collection, and they probably have several mummies in there, or mummified people, mummified remains in there, and they've already changed the label to show that they want to go forward with this change.
Okay, and going on here, it says, in cases where the person's name is known, the mummified remains of name is used. So if you know that the person's name was Lisa Blair or something like that, you could say, these are the mummified remains of Lisa Blair. And otherwise, if they don't know the person's name, then you use the term mummified person instead.
Right. So as it says, otherwise, mummified person is used. So they might sometimes know the names of these people, especially because in ancient Egypt, mummified people were typically very important or rich, like pharaohs or priests or like people in the high positions of power. So often their names were known already.
Right, and if they don't know, they're just going to say mummified person instead of the word mummy. Now, this change arose from the concern that visitors are viewing the mummified remains as if they were merely objects. So here we've got the verb to arise. Arose is the past tense. To arise just means something happened as the result of something. And the people at the museum were worried. They were concerned that people were looking at the mummies as if they were just objects. Oh, there's a mummy, there's a thing, and they weren't thinking about whether that was actually a person many years ago.
Right, exactly. And I've seen mummified remains in other museums, sometimes, and it's interesting because, yeah, you do see that they're an actual person, and they may look a little bit spooky because they're dead, but you can definitely see that's a human being in there. And so it is definitely a concern that people would view them as just objects and not people. And so, of course, who came up with this first? This concern was expressed by Adam Goldwater, manager of the Great North Museum, Hancock, in a statement where he discussed the remains of Ertiru, a mummified woman whose remains reside in the museum. So already we have at least one named person who has their remains mummified in this museum, in the Great North Museum. So they decided that they were going to dignify them by, using their name, using her name.
That's right. So that's what this person at this museum said. And he, of course, issued a statement and he discussed the remains of this person named Irtiru, I hope I said that right. She was a mummified woman, and then again, her remains reside in the museum. Okay, to reside usually refers to a living person as to where they live. I am from the United States, but I reside in Taipei. I live here. But here we're talking about the mummified remains of somebody as if they were a real person. So yes, the remains reside in the museum. That's where they are.
Right, exactly. So, in a way, she is residing there. And what else did he say about this issue? Goldwater stated that he wants visitors to acknowledge that she is not an object, but a real human who was once alive and had a very specific belief about how her body should be treated after death. Right, like if she was mummified, she probably wanted to be mummified because the ancient Egyptians believed that their bodies should be preserved so that they could move on into the afterlife and have a full, second life there.
Exactly. So that's what this person at the museum said. He wants those visitors to admit or to acknowledge that she's not just an object, but a real person who once lived a long time ago. And apparently this person knew what was going to happen to their body after they died. They were aware of this process, so they had a very specific belief about how their body should be treated after death. It could be religious reasons or political reasons or whatever, but this person probably knew what was going to happen to her body once she was buried and placed in, I guess, the ground or a tomb or whatever. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in our lesson for today. Let's take a break and listen to our Chinese teacher.
Hello everyone, 我是派老师。今天讲解的是夏季合刊 Unit 11 British Museums are changing the name for mummified remains 这一课的课程。请问大家看过真正的木乃伊吗？即使没有亲眼见过，应该都在电影、电视里面看过。你会觉得害怕吗？在英国，有些博物馆的馆藏有木乃伊，但他们觉得称为 mummy 会让人联想到可怕的电影情节，忽略了真实的木乃伊其实以前都是活生生的人，有人性的面相，所以他们觉得这些木乃伊以后应该要改名正名为 The Mummified Person。不过没有想到，原本想要借此表达对古埃及文化的尊重，博物馆的这种做法呢，反而招致批评。希望博物馆如果真的想要表示尊重，就应该要把掠夺来的这些战利品归还给原本的国家。好，那我们直接看这课课文，请看到第一段第一句 Some archaeologists claim that 请把 claim 画起来，这里就是声称表示，这些考古学家呢，他们就说了，好，这个句子后面的句子比较复杂，整句中文的意思呢，其实说一些考古学家声称，在大众文化当中，木乃伊被描绘成超自然怪物的方式，破坏了这些曾经真实存在过的人，他们的人性面。好，我们首先要先看到的就是整个句子的主要子句是在 some archaeologists claim， 主词是 some archaeologists， 它的动词呢是 claim， 那后面从 that 一直到最后，这个其实呢都是属于在 claim 后面的名词子句。那这个名词子句里面呢，其实又包了一个关系子句。The manner 是这个名词子句它的主词。那这个名词子句的动词在哪里呢？ Undermines， 隔了这么远，所以呢，我们看到在这个名词子句 that 所引导的名词子句，主词是 the manner， 那它所搭配的动词呢是 undermines。那这个 the manner 这个主词呢，它又有一个关系子句，就是后面的这个 in which。好，那这里它所表示的这个关系子句所表示的意思就是说，在这种在流行文化当中他们把木乃伊描述成超自然怪物，那这种描绘方式呢，破坏了木乃伊的人性面相，意思就是这样。那我们再进一步看到这个关系子句里面呢，有一个动词就是 depict， 它的用法 请同学特别记得哦 ，depict 的用法呢是 depict A as B， 那这里是用被动，这边所用的呢是被动，就是把木乃伊描述成呢超自然的怪物。好，那接下来请同学看到第5个句子。In cases where the person's name is known， 在某些案例当中 ，where the person's name is known， 请同学把这个关系副词 where 圈起来。那 cases 后面呢，我们通常就是加完整的子句，那用这个 where 这个关系副词。如果你知道这个人的名字，那就会说 the mummified remains of 什么人，就是谁的木乃伊化的他的遗骸。好，接下来我们请同学看到第2段。第2段呢，请同学看到第1个句子 ，This change arose from 这样子的改变，从为什么会有这样的改变呢 ？Arose from 就表示源于起始于，就是因为有很多人会去关切嘛，所以后面这个 concern 这件事情呢，造成了博物馆呢决定要这么做。
We're going to take a short break now, but please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
All right, we are back for our second half of our article. We've been talking about how some archaeologists at different British museums are taking initiative to change the labeling and change the naming of the remains of people that they got from different cultures where these people were mummified. They are changing to move away from the term mummy and go toward mummified remains and to name these people where they know their names.
We probably have several examples of this going on in society where the old term is no longer considered appropriate.
Right.
Like handicapped people or cripples. We can't use those terms because they're kind of impolite.
Or things like calling little people midgets is very offensive.
Right, so we have more polite terms for them nowadays. And that's kind of the same concept here. To say mummy might seem a little bit disrespectful because you're thinking of it as a thing. You're objectifying that person. You're just treating them as an object. But in this particular case, they're changing the term to mummified person, which adds some more syllables, and it may be more time-consuming to say it that way, but it's all for a good cause.
Right, exactly. It's trying to humanize people who were mummified and whose remains are now in these museum collections, and saying that they had very specific beliefs about how their bodies should be treated after death. However, this isn't the full story because this is just a name change and there's another material fact that some people are saying that this doesn't do anything about. So that's the topic that starts our next paragraph. However, some critics have claimed this move doesn't achieve anything substantial. Substantial means something of substance, meaning something that is materially changed, that is changed in the real world and not just in things like language, but in the way that people are treated or in the way that objects are moved around, like if these mummified remains were going to be moved out of the museums, which is kind of what they are talking about, the critics of this move.
Right, so it doesn't really do anything significant or substantial. Yes, it's great that they're changing the term for mummies to mummified remains. Isn't that nice? It's generous, it's moral, but still, it isn't really significant. It isn't substantial. That's what the critics say. They say the name change supposedly respects ancient Egyptian culture, but makes no actual effort to heal the wounds of colonialism. That, of course, refers to when countries take over other countries and make them a colony of the mother country. So colony is the noun here. Colonialism is also the noun, but it refers to that actual phenomenon or that process.
Yeah, it's making other countries into colonies. And Britain did this for countries all over the world. Hong Kong is an example. So is Australia, Canada, the US once, and numerous countries in Africa. And I'm not sure if Egypt was an actual colony, but I do know that British archaeologists around the early 20th century took a lot of ancient Egyptian artifacts out of Egypt and put them in museums in Britain and sold them there. So, definitely there's a lot of things that don't belong to Britain per se, because they're supposed to be back in their country of origin, but colonialism meant that they took them anyway.
Yeah, basically they stole those things and then profited off of them in their own countries. So yes, indeed, in recent years, lots of British museums have come under fire. They have come under attack. They have been criticized for how the artifacts within their collections were obtained. Artifacts, of course, are things with a certain value. They're made by a person. They could be the mummies. They could be sculptures. They could be pottery and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those are all examples of artifacts.
Right, and archaeologists in particular will be interested in artifacts and in collecting them and studying them. But, you know, they've come under fire for a number of different artifacts, not just Egyptian, but I remember there was an issue with them having Moai statues from Easter Island that the people on Easter Island want back. And so there's many such things, and the paragraph goes on to say, many relics of ancient Egypt were looted by Europeans and have subsequently been permanently damaged. To loot means to steal something that you just find in a place and you take it out of that place. Like, for example, if there's a store that's been abandoned and, you know, a bunch of people need food, they might go and loot the store. They just take as much food as they can and run away. That would be looting. And so artifacts, a lot of artifacts were looted, including relics, which are ancient artifacts that have like a religious or cultural significance that are really important.
Yeah, just some kind of object that comes from an earlier time. And yes, they were stolen or looted by Europeans and then later actually damaged. And critics believe that if British museums want to respect the mummified people, they should repatriate them rather than display them on British soil. So if they really want to put their money where their mouth is, they should actually give these things back to the countries they belong to. That's what the term repatriate means. It just means to return that thing to its original country.
Yeah, exactly. So to repatriate can also apply to people who go back to their country of origin. Like if Tom or I were to move back to the US because that's where we're from, we would be repatriating. The opposite would be expatriating, which is to leave the country you're from and go to a different one. So critics were saying that British museums should repatriate these mummified remains. This would make amends for their colonial actions. It would sort of make things good with the people they stole them from or the countries they stole them from.
Right, and here we've got the term to make amends. You could also say to make up for, to compensate for something bad that you've done. For example, maybe I was supposed to meet John for dinner on Friday, but I blew him off. I did not show up. So to make amends for that, I sent him a nice big cake.
So to make amends, kind of to say, sorry, here, I'm doing something to make it better. Will you forgive me? And so critics are saying this is what these British museums should be doing. And whether they're going to do it or not, that's up to the question. While this debate rages on, we can still appreciate how this new term helps maintain the dignity and humanity of ancient Egyptians. So they're saying the debate over whether these remains should be repatriated is raging on. When something rages on, it's continuing in a passionate way and maybe an angry way, and both sides have a lot of things to say about it, and it's not over yet.
Right, the storm can rage or it can rage on if it continues. That just means something violent or intense continues. And yes, indeed, we do have this debate. And I suppose the opposite debate says that, well, if these relics remain in Britain, they're relatively safe. If they're in Egypt, who knows if there's going to be a government coup or something like that, and they'll destroy the museum like the Taliban did to those Buddhist statues in Afghanistan. They're gone forever. And so some people may say, well, they're probably safer in European hands or something like that.
Well, I mean, that's up for debate, and the debate rages on. But at least people are saying, you know, we can appreciate trying to maintain the dignity of these mummified people as they would have wanted to be thought of instead of being, you know, supernatural monsters that come out of the sand.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, I have a memory from childhood of a cartoon that showed just that, a mummy walking across the desert as if it were a zombie or something, chasing after people. And yes, indeed, I think a lot of people have that stereotype of mummies.
Yeah, like old Hollywood horror films, or even, there's the films like the Mummy films, where the mummies are depicted as humans, but they're also evil and kind of monstrous.
Exactly, so that's how we think of them nowadays, and this new term, mummified remains, may give them some dignity and humanity in order for us to respect the ancient Egyptians. Dignity, of course, is a feeling of worth or a quality of being worthy, of being respected, and to have honor and stuff like that. Indeed, we should give these mummies or these mummified remains some dignity. We should treat them with respect, and we should also consider their humanity, how they fit in the picture of human beings, and indeed, we should respect them and not think of them as terrible monsters.
Right, exactly. And with any different ancient people from ancient cultures, they all had complex lives. They all were people with thoughts and dreams and, things like we have today. We're all human, and I think this can kind of help us to understand that everyone has their own unique life, and it doesn't matter what time they're from, but definitely, everybody deserves dignity, no matter what.
That's right. So the next time you go to some museums in Britain or in Egypt or whatever, you'll have a new way to interpret mummies. You'll think of them as mummified remains, and we hope you have a good time at those museums. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's turn things over now to our Chinese teacher.
再接着呢，请同学看到第3段这边了。第3段呢，其实是在讲很多人对于博物馆想要为木乃伊证明的这件事情提出他们的质疑。However, some critics have claimed this move 就是博物馆想证明的这件事情哦，他们这种做法 doesn't achieve anything substantial， 所以批评的人就认为说，又没有什么实质的改变，没有什么实质的差异。好，那再来呢，我们看到第3个句子 ，Many British museums have come under fire。那请同学把这个 have come under fire 画起来，这也是一个很妙的比喻的方式。我们就看到这个 fire 是火，这里其实应该是一种譬喻的说法，就是说这些英国的博物馆受到了批评。好，再来呢，请同学看到第4个句子 ，Many relics of ancient Egypt。那古埃及有很多的这些古物 were looted。请同学把这个 loot 特别画起来。这个 loot 倒不是我们平常说的一般的偷，通常呢就是趁着好像战争啊或者有动乱的时候呢，那你去打家劫舍的这种做法呢，就是 loot。好，那这些批评的人，他们认为不是只是为木乃伊证明，他们主张呢怎么样？这些博物馆应该要 they should repatriate them。这 repatriate 其实呢就是把这些东西呢物归原主，那我们这里所用的动词是 repatriate。那最后我们看到这个第6个句子，这个第6个句子呢，其实我们有一个片语 make amends， 请同学画起来，就是指弥补。如果博物馆愿意归还的话，才能够弥补他们在殖民时期所做的这些坏事。好，以上就是我们针对这篇文章所做的中文讲解，谢谢大家。
That's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, the next time you go to a museum, you have to say mummified remains. You can no longer say mummy. From all of us here at English Digest, my name is Tom.
And I'm Kat.
Goodbye.
Bye.